What's a dirty secret about your workplace that people shouldn't be knowing? Story 1. I work in marine mammal rescue. Sea lions are cute, but OMG, they stink. We were actually taught in training that you can't approach one from the front without holding your breath. They like to roar and huff when startled as a sort of self-defense, and it will basically knock a person out. We laughed about it in training and I didn't take it too seriously, until my third day on the job. I approach a sea lion and it rears up and gives the biggest yawn huff roar right into my face from 2 feet away. I fell to my knees, puked, and was basically incapacitated and lightheaded for several minutes. Did not make that mistake again. Story 2. I work in a plastic bag plant. Everything in here runs on electricity. The owners tapped into a power line that runs through the property, and for more than 10 years they didn't pay a dime. They made tens of millions. When the fraud was found out, they blamed an employee who was from Latin America and were given a $200K fine. You can't find the story online anymore. They used their community connections to have it erased, and flat out deny it ever happened. Who says crime doesn't pay? Story 3. As a longtime probation officer, one thing that surprises people is how many unusual creative sentences we have to enforce. Most people think such sentences are banned by the 8th Amendment, but that's not really how that works. For one, most of the time the offender takes the plea deal for the unorthodox sentence willingly to avoid prison, so they never appeal on 8th Amendment grounds anyways, since that would just result in resentencing and going to prison. Occasionally such sentences make the news, but many don't. The most notable one I worked was in 2016, which did make the news, when a woman was being sentenced for a serious case of animal neglect. The judge gave her a choice: incarceration, or spending a day sitting in the stinkiest, smelliest part of the county dump to see how it feels to live in filth. She chose the latter. We had to contact the dump and say, "Hey, judge's orders. Help us find the absolutely most revolting place here." They didn't believe us until we showed them the paperwork. I took it seriously and found the nastiest place there for her. By the end, I think she was wishing she'd taken the jail time. Story 4. I'm a handyman. Contractor's favorite saying is, "Can't see it from my house." You ever see those videos from home inspectors pointing out all the crooked or broken in brand new construction? It's because the builders don't care, and then once all the cracks start forming in your walls they go, "That's just the house settling." Nope, they built it shitty in the first place, and now their shoddy work is shining through. Story 5. I work in public service. I don't know if I'd call it a dirty secret, but when the government started stocking men's rooms with free pad stampins, we all agreed to turn a blind eye to the one trans dude taking them all regularly and dropping them off at the local homeless shelter. He's the only one affected, and he's keeping homeless women well supplied on the government's dime. Story 6. No longer employed there, but when I worked at a certain big box retailer of home improvement products, we would occasionally see hopeful strangers sitting in our lobby with boxes or other packaging waiting for meetings. These people were small-time inventors of new products and were trying to get them on the shelves of our retail locations. What they didn't know is that, as condition for consideration of carrying the product, they would be required to turn one or more samples over to the company to be examined by the product teams. If the product showed promise, one of those samples would be shipped to another country where it would be thoroughly dissected and analyzed so that an equivalent product could be developed under the house label with enough modifications to not infringe on any patents, of course, and that product was what would end up on the shelf. I was told that a lawsuit pretty much ended the practice, and now they don't allow pitches from independent producers anymore. They just wait to see what other retailers are already carrying and selling well and copy those. Story 7. My company will hire you solely based on physical attraction. My boss has told me that he feels if there are young attractive females in the office, more employees will want to come in because they'll want to flirt talk with these girls. Story 8. I worked at a goat farm and we make a lot of buck rags to sell. Rags wiped all over billy buck goats during their mating season to get their scent on it. The official use is that people can buy them to check if their does are in heat to see their reaction to the scent, but I knew that 95% of the people who buy them are using them to discipline their children. Apparently it's a thing. Make them put their nose inside the jar with a buck rag for a minute or two and oh boy, they won't be act up again anytime soon. Story 9. We're shipping dangerously corrosive chemicals across the country in tanks that have repeatedly failed safety inspections. Very few get pulled over, so it's cheaper for the company to pay the fines instead of repairing the tanks or buying brand new ones. And with all the slashes to funding, firings, and relaxation of environmental regulations, it's getting even easier to do so. Story 10. I work in a grocery store. We don't clean the lids of the yogurt or sour cream tubs if the lid falls off. We just put it back on the product. It can fall on the floor, in a puddle of milk, doesn't matter. At most, we might wipe it off on our apron or with a paper towel if available. Bulk produce items do fall on the floor regularly. We just pick them up and put them back on the shelf if it isn't damaged. If a container of berries or tomatoes pops open, we'll just put them all back in and put it back on the shelf. Nothing is rinsed off first. Almost nothing is actually made in the bakery. Everything either comes in already made or in portion pieces of dough they throw into the oven. The only thing they really do is decorate cakes, donuts, bread, and bagels. Even most of the cakes come in with icing already on them. They just add some extra decorations. All of the seafood comes in frozen and is kept frozen even though the sign says never frozen. In fact, the seafood people will grab bags of frozen shrimp off the shelf and put it in the display case. You are literally paying more for some thought-out shrimp. Story 11. All of the big four accounting firms are involved in extremely unethical conduct. What truly goes on at the high level at all four of them is heinous, and to think that any of them are independent is a joke. They also treat their best and brightest workers like absolute by bullying, gaslighting them relentlessly into overwork. One need only spend time on the accounting subreddit to see the effects of that particular abuse. Story 12. I'm scientist and I work in pretty well-known institution that houses a lot of scientists that are very popular with the public, particularly folks on Reddit and the like. Pretty much every one of these guys, and they are all guys, are the most disgusting, insupportable lechers. I have had to intervene so many times on behalf of female graduate students and postdocs who are getting really harassed, and generally, nothing happens to these men. Finally, after literally decades of an institutional culture like this, a few scientists were let go after they committed criminal offenses that had physical evidence and witnesses. Even then, it was only after months and months of paid leave for them, and I just saw one of these guys back the other day, so I guess even that didn't stick. Your hero is probably one of these guys. Story 13. I have coworkers that know my Reddit username and regularly look at my comments or replies. They however don't know that I know that they know. It is super obvious even though they think they are being sly, spying on me for some reason. They mix up things I say in real life versus comments I've left on Reddit and cannot keep it straight. I've known for quite some time, so every once in a while I throw in some crazy, and I can tell when they've read it because their demeanor towards me changes. I have a dislike for certain types of politics. They mimic my sentiments when I make any type of Reddit comment about it. Anyways, cat's out of the bag, boys. Now just wondering to myself if any of you will have the to say we have been spying on you. Even though you use certain subreddits as a form of self-help, we are all reading it. Instead of focusing on me, focus on fixing your broken marriages, rocky and unhappy home lives, and your gambling and substance addiction problems.
Don't worry about me, il be fine.
Story 14. A local politician got in trouble for doing stuff. Turns out he was employed by my company, and no one had ever heard of him. He was a consultant that used his position in government to steer contracts to the company. Story 15. I sang opera professionally for a long time. The amount of harassment and assault that is not only overlooked but excused is absolutely abhorrent. When Domingo was called out, I had a colleague who furiously defended him. Her argument was that he was always nice to her. Well, he must be a good dude then, if he was nice to one lady who was close to his age and was already an established artist. He preyed on young women early in their career. Our old general director didn't give two shits about most of the artists and would repeatedly hire one particular conductor who groped a colleague on stage. It's getting a little better, but it's far, far too slow. Story 16. UK universities get most of their money from the tuition fees of overseas students. They will accept weak applicants and overlook poor performance if it means the overseas tuition money keeps rolling in. Story 17. I once worked for a polling company, the kind that runs surveys for elections and marketing purposes. I learned that numbers can be made to prove anything remotely plausible and to not trust election polls when they are too tight. Story 18. I mean, it's not dirty, nor really is it a secret, but the hamburgers meat patties that don't sell at Wendy's get taken off the grill and go right into a container in the refrigerator below the grill. Those become tomorrow's chili. The chicken in the chicken sandwiches that does not sell, those go into tomorrow's crispy chicken salads. Back when Wendy's had salad bars, the buns that didn't sell today became tomorrow's garlic bread. Story 19. I worked at a clothes donation store exporter for cash under the table. All of those donation bins you see in parking lots with different charities written on them. The bins are all owned by one company who donates a tiny percentage to charity to be able to use the charity name. All clothes and shoes are exported to Africa for profit. Everything else is trash and goes in the garbage. Toys, books, art, digital media, electronics. The company was run by 4 fairly recent immigrants and every single one of them had a late model car and owned property in a very HCL area. They did allow the employees to pick through and take any and all rejects however, which allowed me to have a thriving side hustle flipping games, movies, and toys for the few years I worked there. Story 20. Software engineer here. Worked for several tech companies in all the US tech hubs. AI is not the magic you think it is. Sometimes it's just a really big decision tree. Story 21. Work as a gardener, but specialize in invasive species remediation. It's ridiculously unregulated and underpaid for what is incredibly dangerous work. My main thing is Mantigazyanum giant hogweed, and I've saw people treating it in shorts and a t-shirt. The sap is phototoxic and can cause third-degree burns in sunlight for up to 7 years. I would happily do the paperwork and additional licensing if it meant untrained and under-equipped people weren't risking life-changing injuries for a few £100. Story 22. Worked in a grocery store. It's probably a well-known fact, but expired products and those that were about to expire were used in the preparation of various salads, baked goods, and so on. Story 23. I've worked in education for over 15 years now, not as a teacher but in various support positions. Schools and school districts have tons of creative ways to juice their school grades, graduation rates, test score averages. Many of those involve recommending failing students enroll at alternative education charters, home education, and private schools. It's practically an open secret. And every spring you get waves of seniors who meet with guidance counselors and are recommended these options. This is why I don't place much value education rankings. Story 24. Companies are willing to hold on to insurance agents who do illegal or unethical stuff as long as they keep bringing in new business. Makes me sick how I've seen blatant ethical and legal violations in this industry, just for the sake of people selling a policy, and the company protects them simply because they make the company money. Story 25 that my former boss was an enabler to men be flirting asking favors from 18 to 22 years old young interns. He used to save there from anything and everything. It was abysmal. Story 26 not my current workplace, but I worked for a non-profit that focused on a specific medical condition. They did good work and the local chapters were great, but the staff at the national level was unhinged. 1 year at the national conference top-level staff had letters shoved under their hotel doors. They had forced out the national director because it came out that she had left the country permanently with her assistant affair partner and hadn't actually done any work in more than 2 years. The letters threatened to trash the org's reputation and ruin the work they were doing if any of it came out. They just received a massive donation and couldn't risk it, so the whole thing was hushed up. Story 27 I worked for a medical research company. All those research methods that they're not supposed to do because it's illegal here. Yeah, they just go to other countries to do that. I had to take care of the machine that had all the research and information on the experiments they were doing in South America. Story 28 I work in a manufacturing-related industry. We tout how much effort we're putting into making our consumer products eco-friendly and green, which really does have an impact, but the amount of waste our day-to-day operations generate is staggering. When I was working from home during COVID, receiving samples and contracts and other documents to review and sign, I was filling up 4 to 5 big trash bags per week with all the plastic shippers and styrofoam padding that came along with those. Imagine that x 100 people doing similar work across the org. Now that we're back in office, we have to have trash collection come by multiple times a day. And this doesn't even touch on how many next-day international air shipments we send back and forth, how many pieces the factories scrap due to small defects, and how many unsold products go straight to the landfills after languishing in a climate-controlled warehouse for a year. I guess the point I'm getting at is trying to reduce your personal carbon footprint is a noble goal. Don't abandon it, but real change will have to come from holding corporations accountable for the waste they generate. Story 29 used to work at an office that prided itself on winning awards for being environmentally friendly. The awards hung behind the front desk and they would bug employees every day about how hard it was to get the achievement. 1 year, they designated me as the environmental rep and I would fill out the application for the award. I found out that getting a passing grade was shockingly easy. For instance, a large portion of the questions asked how much we recycle. Our office had recycle bins, but our landlords threw that stuff back in the trash when they picked it up. Don't need to mention that on the form. Like at least 10 to 20 of questions didn't understand what our company did, so we marked those as NA vastly overstate your contributions. If a prompt asked if you ever returned lots of product you didn't use, describe it as so even if it's just returning one item at target shift responsibility. No, that wasn't us throwing away dumpsters of material, it was just the contractor we're paying, so we're not going to mention that. Easiest of all, when a question says rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, always give 10s as long as you didn't have to back up the claim. Story 30 I taught at a community college in rural Florida. Funding for the school from the FL state government is largely tied to enrollment count, graduation rates, and admission of minority students. The president explicitly stated this part. The president went on to say that to boost the minority student count, the school would grow its athletics program to attract more minorities. The president is being totally manipulated by one of his executives, a female, and this executive's husband, a faculty member, to parlay more money for the married couple. One of the recent VP of Academic Affairs and her best friend, then assistant dean, were best friends long before they climbed into those roles. Both were demoted because, allegedly, these two didn't want to give a faculty member tenure because these two didn't personally like the faculty member. My college would accept any student with a pulse. A student used ChatGPT to write multiple papers. The faculty member gave FS to the student for these submissions and failed the student. After some arm-wringing, the faculty member was instructed to remove the FS, give the student several weeks to rewrite the papers, and give the student a new semester grade. Administration doesn't give about academic rigor, they just want to keep accepting anyone and passing everyone. There is a revolving door of nursing professors at the school. Some of the former professors have been too rigorous in their teaching. One of my colleagues got non-renewed because his students' grades weren't high enough, not enough students passing. There is a faculty member who has an Americans with Disabilities Act ADA accommodation to work from home because of his agoraphobia. One of my colleagues referred to him as the man who's scared of bats. This dismissive colleague is now the handicapped faculty member's boss. Story 31 Know what, I'm going to gloat. I have been with my org for 5 years. They serve federal and state clients, making things better for people. They do a good job. They also treat us employees really well. I wish they paid more. But know what, they ain't been screwing around with sleazy and questionable practices to capture business. I say this because I have worked for companies that went from small to large and the leadership screwed the clients, the employees in the process. These leaders went from nobodies to household names in the process and made themselves rich. I'm glad I don't work for those kind of people anymore. My company rocks. Story 32 I am a scientist. I produce research and have for many institutions. I only produce a research which is the top journals in the world where all the best science is published. The dirty secret that is known by many scientists, especially social scientists, is there is a heavy left-wing bias in science and you cannot publish at good journals anything that goes against the narrative. I say this as a left-wing person. I actually got to work close to probably the #1 race diversity researcher in the world. She is at least top 5. She was discussing a study's results, but one of the findings of the study basically showed, and I am super generalizing here because it was complex, hey, turns out white people aren't racist in America. She said to me dead in the face, we are not reporting those results because it isn't the type of story we want to tell or they want to hear. Story 33. No-kill shelters just transfer animals to county animal shelters to take care of the tough part. Rescues come through the county shelters and take all the cute animals and then turn around and charge hundreds for them. Most animals are put down because of kennel cough. A lot happen to be a brown pit or a black dog that has a snotty nose or someone heard coughing. Wink, wink. Story 34. I work in dementia care. Your grandparents get really creative with the old swear words when they're less inhabited and they have the greatest sense of humor. Story 35. Defense industry. Specifically in the US, part of the reason the military is so expensive to update and maintain is the fact that the government basically just pays whatever the companies tell them things cost without looking into it. A valve costing $3 is sold to the Navy for $30. A computer costing $900 is sold to the Army for $2,400, etc. Don't get me wrong, a lot of stuff is genuinely expensive. I guarantee that the military is paying way too much for it though. Story 36. For the housing industry, everyone is pretty much everyone. It's like a huge polyamorous workplace. It was not limited to one office and they mostly have monogamous relationships at home with kids, etc. Last 2 times I worked it I was hit on, they kept giving hints. Like super obvious final workplace after playing stupid no longer worked and I had to flat out reject. They started making my time there hellish and one girl was groping me and scolded me when I suddenly just walked off yelling like I'm your superior. Yada yada yada. Customer support industry is mostly drug users, not exclusively, but people typically work it to party, and use drugs also. If you're that yells at the person trying to help you, good luck with your issues. Some don't do anything and others actively try to make it harder for you purposefully out of spite, so quit being to CS agents. Not their fault and they don't need you unloading your frustrations when they're literally there to help. Small bonus. Seen some agents put PPL on hold. To chill and talk to mates for a bit, then come back 5 to 10 minutes later to fix your issue almost immediately. Disclaimer, not always the case. Often they actually ask seniors for help, however just stressing the point, if you are kind to them and view them as humans, they will treat you in kind. Story 37. My office moved locations and in doing so, mail for the old office would still be delivered. I got the mail one day and it was addressed to Faces of Death. My new office is where they would produce these horrendous movies if you are of the age where you remember these commercials. I showed this to only 2 coworkers and nobody else knows or else they would freak out. Story 38. If a customer dropped a fork, we would go in the kitchen and just wipe it with a tissue. I told the chef that was really bad for the customer. He said wipe it or F off anyways, so I quit yesterday. Story 39. I work in tax collection for the DMV. The majority of employees here are highly incompetent and are consistently collecting taxes and fees improperly, sometimes charging too much or too little based on the situation. The supervisors are usually too busy to be able to always correct mistakes and double-check the fees. Since the taxpayers usually don't know all of the laws in regards to vehicle tax collection, the mistakes just go on and on with no one knowing about the errors. In the collector's defense, the tax codes are ridiculously numerous and difficult to understand and are constantly changing when lawmakers rewrite the rules. Story 40. As someone who works in corporate finance, let's just say those offshore accounts get away with a lot of things. But because it's outside of US jurisdiction, there is nothing my company will do to report because company gets paid regardless. Story 41. Well is going down right now. I'm an apprentice in my first year. The woman in charge of all the apprentices has made out with one of the apprentices during a company party. To add to that, she twerked in front of one of the board members and drunkenly licked the apprentice's throat during a drinking game. She also has a boyfriend of 10 years. She willingly resigned a couple of days ago. Yeah, no, she did not. LMAO. Please excuse my English, it's not my first language. Story 42. Not dirty but still a liability. How much access developers engineers have to provide personally identifiable information of users, even though that data is supposed to be encrypted protected. Story 43. This is pretty much common knowledge, but there's an awful lot of people who choose to where they eat at hospitals, and it is almost always a terrible idea. Story 44. ASE certifications don't mean, literally the last few in-person classes I've been to regarding those certifications. At the end they literally give you the answers so you can't fail, then you pay for the certification. Story 45. How much product we use to throw away and/or donate on a weekly basis in the bakery department of the membership-based warehouse-type store I work at. Bare minimum we were scanning out 2 to 3 pallets, at least 6 to 7 feet high, probably a half to 3/4 of $1 million worth of product on a nightly basis. Took the pandemic, a new store manager, and a couple new bakery managers to get those numbers down to where we're scanning out 4 to 5 pallets every week instead of doing that nearly every day. As for the craft store I used to work at, yeah, I could write a book on that. Story 46. I'm a teacher. Students rapidly dropping attention span and critical thinking is something you see or hear about, but it is very much real. Over the past 3 years I've noticed kids are being less able to focus for more than 5 minutes without going to drawing or talking to the person next to them. Further, with the addition of strong AI like ChatGPT, they are not being as punished academically as they should be, as they can get entire course notes in 10 seconds and just cram a few days before tests. This will certainly be an issue in 20 years when kids raised on generative AI and low attention spans become our central workforce, but it'll be long retired by then, so I dream. Story 47. Compostable trays, cups, plates, and such are nearly a scam. A lot of schools got pressured into adopting them because it's green, but then those items do not get sent to composting facilities. They just go to landfills with the rest of the trash. Same for eco-wedding plates and restaurant takeout bags and boxes. Those items may eventually somewhat sort of disintegrate, but to be composted back to actual dirt they have to be rotated, oxygenated, kept moist, and treated a particular way. They still take sometimes decades or longer to even start to decompose in landfills. If they even decompose at all, it's not as green as everyone thinks it is. Story 48. My 2 agency bosses pass massive profit disbursements to their holding company to pay themselves, then show all the agency financials to everyone in quarterly meetings in the name of complete transparency to show that we needed to work harder and couldn't do big raises. They made one. The highest paid employees, me and my counterpart, and did almost nothing. Edit could not do raises. Massive distinction. Dog training boarding facility. Your dog don't get a thing you bring in because it's our fault if they eat something overnight and cause a blockage. Story 49. Old workplace. If you buy DVDs from places like Amazon, Bowl.com, etc., and they were produced before 2020, they are not new. They are purchased by the sellers at thrift stores or other places. Disc cleaned of scratches, new plastic wrapped around case and sold new for the full price. Story 50. I've shared this before, but when I worked for the local power company in my city doing IT, I discovered that their entire billing system went through a Windows 98 machine on a 28K modem. Story 51. Used to work for a chain of bakeries which is approximately 15 stores. Nearly everything you buy has been par-baked at a central location, frozen then sent overnight to stores and then rebaked and sold to public. Story 52. I can't go into too much detail, but I once worked in a lab at a very prestigious university that was committing copyright infringement by paying several people to manually copy data out of textbooks 8 hours a day. They were also not paying the data entry people the full hours that they worked and paying them close to minimum wage on top of that. They were also underpaying me, so I quit and moved to a job that gave me a 100 raise. Story 53. I used to work at a popular pizza place with roaches. I remember seeing ones here and there, and trying to forget about it. Then one day my coworkers was cleaning behind the fridge and hitting the fridge with a broom. There might have been 15 to 30 of them visibly scurrying around in the bottom of just one fridge when I handed someone a pizza box one time. One was crawling on the counter towards the guy, and I knocked it off the counter. Definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with that, and the manager was in. We left pizza in the display one day and he made us clean the walls and floors by hand. He stopped giving me shifts too, like I once worked once in 2 weeks. That put me in a really bad spot moving forward, but thankfully I got a real job that pays more than 2x what I was making. Story 54. I used to work at a kindergarten. They would ask the students to memorize stories in a second language, then record them and create advertisements claiming that the children had mastered the language just because they were enrolled in that kindergarten, even though the kids had only memorized the material. Story 55. I work in signage. We have some massive brands under our roof. We make 80 of the signs in our warehouse. It has no air conditioning. The workers smoke all day long. All the signs come out covered in sweat and spittle, and no one cares. Story 56. I used to work at theme parks. And no, the employees are not excited to be there. The pay is universally dog benefits and etc. usually amount to hey race a couple days you can come as a guest, and if you get hurt on the job, you're as gone, although I'm sure none of this is really a surprise. Story 57. A higher up at a hospital was asking different women to come work on a research paper privately at his house. He was very convincing as he was grooming you. However, this paper couldn't be done in public places because other people may think it was something romantic. I was one of the ones he invited. He would hound me at work about how this would advance my career and help me get promoted. Thankfully, my husband protected me and said absolutely not. The creep was very persuasive. It is frightening looking back how close I came to being one of his victims. Not too long after, someone reported it to Human Resources. Human Resources found he was inviting many women in the hospital to research and offering promotion as a lure. He was also sending lewd pictures and pressuring women. The hospital offered him paid leave and no questions asked. He took paid leave and found a CEO position at another hospital and teaches at a college too. I found he had invited pretty much every girl on our floor to research with him. He was highly respected by our hospital. He was never sued. It never went to the newspaper, and the hospital hushed it up, so he just gets to continue with his abuse in a higher position of power. The hospital made it clear if I talked, I'd be unemployed, be careful. Sometimes, the creeps are the ones that give you the recognition and attention you've always wanted, but it's all part of the grooming. Story 58. Not my current employer, but a previous one. During COVID, the NHS were offering PPE to a lot of businesses in the care sector. From what I understand, they were free at the time because they were seen as a necessity. The small family-run care business I was working for only needed a small number of masks. They did not even use safety goggles, and yet they had weekly deliveries of tons and tons of boxes of the things, replenishing the ones they needed and putting the rest in a van to take to their storage unit. I asked them about why we had way more than they needed, to which the owner said we may not need them, but may as well take them while they're giving them away. The other highlight, which I came across examples of all too many times, was them transferring staff from their other business, doing the paperwork as if it were a formal recruitment process. But having the director of both companies, one singular person, act as both the recruiter for the new role and the referee for their previous role. Even going as far as having full written references addressed to and from the exact same person. Story 59. Fraud advisor in a call center. You know those voice recognition security methods banks have for when you call in? We can listen to every single time you've used it and when you enrolled in it. So don't be taking a, screaming at someone, or anything else you wouldn't want a stranger hearing if you ever use those when calling your bank. Story 60. Place I work has an ESOP program, employee stock ownership plan. Apparently the owner of this company has 50 to 60 million that he siphoned from company profits and stashed away in a bank account separate from the corporation, thus leading to a gross undervaluation of the company. He's being sued currently on ERISA violations. I would love to tell my fellow co-workers the retirement program here is not what they say it is, but I fear retribution. Story 61. Prior employer big evil tech company dropped drug testing due to so many employees and managers being on hard drugs, so many complaints of wild parties with drugs and enough harassment to shame the devil myself. Story 62. Some immigration attorneys actually want to help, but a lot, especially those that take cases of detained people, know dang well you are going to lose your case and be deported, but they are going to take thousands of dollars from you first and tell you to not listen to people who tell you that you are wasting money. There's very few laws that protect immigrants from immigration attorney scams. Story 63. I'm a bit late here, but I'll drop it in anyway. The cellar of the pub I worked in frequently floods with sewage, like it literally fills up with poo, and management tells us that we can't close the pub. We call it the pit. Imagine barrels of beer floating in water with actual turds drifting past them. And we're still serving customers pints, all while they complain about the weird smell that we're not allowed to explain. It gets hosed down after every time it happens and disinfected, but there's like cracks and grates in the floor that are caked in this brown pooey residue. Anyway, if you live in an old town with listed buildings and a terrible sewage system, this might happen more than you'd think in other pubs. Especially corporate chains that do anything to stay open and make money, no matter how bad gets, literally. Story 64. I'm leaving the industry, but I used to work with school district administration, and it genuinely makes me so mad. At least in my state, these superintendents and department heads are making six figures. A lot of it comes from taxpayer money, I believe, and most of their job is just signing off paperwork and attending conferences. Most haven't been in classrooms for years, some never, and are so completely out of touch with teachers' needs. Meanwhile, the teachers are barely getting by and classrooms are getting less money put into them and more class sizes getting much bigger, harder to control. And that's not even going into the corruption, embezzlement, payments under the table, nepotism, scandals, payoffs to sketchy contractors, sweeping under the rug. I could go on all day, which is why I am so happy to be leaving this industry. Story 65. The rural electric co-op is the dumping ground for failed GOP politicians. They lose an election, get a do-nothing job created at the electric utility that tides them over until they can get into office again or become a staffer for another politician.